Hello, welcome to the second BDP podcast series called Design for Inclusion. My name is Haley Ray Denal Atkinson, and my pronouns are she, her. I identify as a biracial, mixed black and white, able cisgender woman, and I'm an accessibility specialist working with Human Space, an inclusive design consultancy of BDP's Toronto studio. The BDP podcast highlights and debates the biggest challenges facing designers today. From designing for a more inclusive world, each episode welcomes international experts from architecture, engineering, and urbanism professions to discuss prominent issues in the industry. The BDP podcast aims to use inclusive language. However, some terminology for inclusion may vary across different cultures and regions. In this series, we discuss topics related to designing for a more inclusive world, from exploring gender equity through our buildings and public spaces, to design that reflects race, color, and culture in the built environment, and how to design a hybrid and inclusive workplace. Why build barriers to accessibility when you can design for inclusion? Welcome to the conversation. Hello, and welcome to Design for Inclusion podcast, where this week we are exploring gender equity and gender expression through the buildings and public spaces we design. This week, we will discuss if we can move from generic equal spaces towards places that truly promote inclusivity and a world where gender is being redefined. And we will also dip into the experiences of our panel and ask if the common solutions for 2S LGBTQIA+ inclusive spaces are led by communities, clients, or governments. Joining me for today's conversation is Colin Ball, Lighting Director from BDP's London studio.
Hi.
Heather Ralston, Design Director at BDP Toronto's studio.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
And Romulus Sim, Architect in BDP's Manchester studio.
Hello.
I'd like to start by asking each of you the question, how have your projects helped to overcome gender equity?
I don't think I can say for certain that any of my projects overcame gender equality, but I think, we are definitely, taking a step in the right direction, through a lot of our projects, as a start, the provision of gender neutral toilets and shower facilities, for instance, it's a great way that we address that. And it really is I guess it's our default position now moving forward on a lot of projects. I do have to say it's only been in the last year or two, really, when it's really come to the fore. I mean, even in the early stages of our projects now, even without client input or a brief, we have completely moved away from the traditional male-female provision, and of course, gender inclusion goes, much further than just toilets. And it's about providing, equal access to all areas, to all resources, opportunities, and I think it requires quite a holistic approach.
Yep. I would completely agree. It's interesting for me, the whole thing of, as you say, gender access as not just within the building industry, let's say, but for design and architecture itself. I've been around long enough to with my first interview to enter the degree course for Manchester Uni at the architecture school. I'm pleased to say I got an unconditional offer, and I remember the presentation they gave us as a group of 18-year-old students, and their proud announcement was that the previous year they'd installed women's toilets in the building. Now, I'm not going to say what year that was, but this was before 1990. So exactly, just as Ron has said, we're seeing a lot of even gender parity between toilet suites. I think everyone knows quite famously, if you go out to a cinema or a sports event or any large crowd event, where's the queue for the toilets? There is a massive disparity. But in actual fact, where we're looking at standardized data for many of our buildings or heights, counter heights, any of us selling our flats or installing a kitchen, what's the counter height you've put your kitchen at? There's all these things of the standardized data that we use are all based on an average male. So that it's interesting that we have that. The other thing I wanted to add as well is just how we work within BDP. We've been working on this for a long time, gender parity, and is an event that we had 2.5 years ago about this was we had a stage full of men, but much of what we wanted to talk about was if men have equal paternity leave and childcare is no longer seen as a female thing, that there is as much masculine contribution to this. You then start seeing that the pressure for childcare is pushed onto the woman, and that even goes into architecture and the spaces that we're providing are baby changing facilities provided in male toilet suites. But again, just as Rom said, we remove gender from toilet suites, that's no longer an issue.
Yeah, I would say just to add in here, I like the way this conversation is expanding from toilets to architecture, and I recently was involved in a project that sort of took on gender equality head on, and it was from a development lens. So I had a female client who was reading an article here in Toronto Life, and the article was about the condo kings. And it was an article about, like Toronto has exploded with respect to development. And it was like the top 8 or 10 developers, and they were all men. And she thought to herself, I've been working in this industry tirelessly for, I think it was 17 or 18 years, so now 20 years, and not getting any kind of recognition. So she decided that she was going to team up with another developer, and they were going to endeavor to have an all-women team. So women engineers, women architects, women, civil engineers, every person on the team be a woman. So I brought this to the other principals at Quadrangle, BDP Quadrangle, and their reaction was I thought so progressive that they said, "Oh, Heather, I don't know about that. That sounds like reverse discrimination. I'm not sure we should touch that project." And I said, "Well, yes, I guess you could view it that way. I hadn't thought about it that way." But I said, if there's a conversation to be had in this regard, I think we want to be at the table having this conversation. And so eventually everyone agreed we would take on the project. And the articles and the press about this all-women development team was everyone wanted to talk about it. I couldn't believe it. I didn't think it would be so topical. But obviously, people still want to, talk about this idea, and it's still a huge matter of public interest. And then, the interviews and questions: what are you doing differently in this condo? How are you, what's different about the process because you're all women? And then one of the most interesting things that happened, actually a highlight, the project's being built now, so that's where we are in the process. But I think it was like our second or third meeting with the with City Hall, like the kind of approvals body of planners and urban designers. They came into the room, and they had replaced all the men with women, and they said, we want to join this party. Essentially, we've decided that we'll only respond with all women from the approval. So it was actually just really fun, I have to say.
Yeah, I once about 15 years ago doing a corporate executive suite for a major new office building here in London as Time Warner headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically where, or at that time they were called IPC Media, but they're the sort of publishers behind all the different magazines and different sort of art publications. And they recognized that they had a majority female office.
Mm-hmm.
So they said straight off their brief to us, and it was an all-woman team that briefed us as a design group, but they said they didn't want the City of London corporate banking masculine hard-edged interior. So they forced everyone to look at things in a different way. And the end result of that was it was almost like a space that had increased flexibility, modes of privacy, Looking back, I can see that actually had increased acoustic properties in terms of this idea of softening a quieter space. We put more indirect and warmer lighting in, and it was one of those things that we weren't necessarily conscious of that trying to be feminine. We were just trying to look at what a more comfortable space is. And now I'd say we're actually doing that in every office that we look at, breakout spaces, a general softening. But it comes under the banner these days under neurodiversity, probably, and just that whole thing of everyone's recognized as a unique individual, so spaces are tailored to how they may want to work. So I think gender feeds into that, along with a number of other different strands that we're looking at.
I agree exactly, and it's funny because the number of interviews that I've done about this project that's called Reina, the all-female team, the word soft has come up quite a bit, and I think some of the unique, as far as mixed-use condominium living, unique features that we put in that building are a messy room for kids downstairs, a music room, someplace for people to be very loud, high degree of transparency to the building's courtyard, and benches and things where you can charge your phone so you can do work while you're looking after your kids. Stroller storage on every floor so that you don't have the inconvenience of parking the stroller downstairs and then carrying your child and all your groceries up in the elevator. But all of these things, yeah, maybe they stemmed, from women, but you're absolutely right, Colin. Paternity leave is alive and well. There's tons of men in our office taking it now. And really, this is really just about the base need of being able to do two things at once. You're looking after your child and you have to work, or you're looking after your child, keeping them safe, and you're, doing whatever. And that applies to everyone. It doesn't matter about gender, right? It's someone having to look after a young one, and it's very challenging, right? So.
Thanks for sharing that, everyone. I think what I'm hearing is these very specific design elements that may have initially started to contribute to gender equity prove to extend far beyond the original intent to truly be inclusive to everyone.
Yeah, and I think it's that's the thing that we've seen is we may have started a number of years ago looking at different forms of inclusion for different minority groups, but the level of overlap that we're now able to employ. So just as you said about accessibility, we might talk about wheelchairs, but actually that completely transforms access for prams, for childcare, etc. So it's actually about all sections community. Once you implement it for one group, you surprisingly see benefits for others.
Yeah, exactly. I'm fond of saying, like, when I've had my first child and I had the stroller and I'm trying to take transit or get here and there, it's like I now know what it's like. Well, not entirely, but I now have an appreciation of like someone in a wheelchair. It's insane. Like, very few of our transit stations were accessible at the time. Like, you have to pre-plan your trip like crazy when you have a mobility issue like that. It really gave me a big appreciation for how people have to navigate the world. I never had to think about it before,
I'd like to circle back to Romulus just for a moment. Early on, I heard you say, beginning maybe about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, is when perhaps awareness and conversations related to these design elements were really starting to catalyze. Can you speak to a particular moment or event to just to bring context to what that may have been?
I don't think there's a particular time, but I remember about a year and a half ago, one of our clients actually brought it up and said, why are we not why are we not providing gender neutral toilets, for instance? And it's a starting point where at the time it wasn't the norm. And if you look at design guides at the moment, I'm designing a building at the moment where we're just looking at shower provision, toilet provisions, and there is no all the guidance out there tells you if you've got X number of people in the building, you provide X number of female toilets, X number of male urinals and toilets. There is no guidance that talks about the provision of gender neutral toilets. So we're having to sort of take all of that existing quite traditional information and try and process that for our current way of thinking. And I do think that changes need to happen at policy level that starts to address some of these things, because we've got guidance for designing accessible spaces, but we've not got guidance for designing for a gender inclusive workplace, for instance.
I suppose there's an opportunity there that we could actually write or contribute to that. Like I say, through your own human space team, we can actually get these things written as a standard, or via promotion. But I think it feeds into where we currently have probably an under provision for women at the moment. It'd be interesting to know, Ron, when those standards were written, and are those standards actually contributing to the large queues for women and not for men? And then when we provide a unisex or omnisex sort of suite, is that something that actually needs to increase against the standards because women are so underrepresented already?
I think you're right. I think it's an opportunity for, I guess, the design community to input into that, because we sit down with a piece of paper and start drawing X number of toilets for male and female. And I think if we think there's a problem there, we can be at the forefront of building something that's going to inform policy.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're at an interesting time now where the pendulum is sort of coming back. I might be wrong in this, but I remember I was just trying to think back. I think it was around 12 or 14 years ago. I did a public meeting. So that's one of those meetings where I'm presenting. I was presenting a residential tower, mixed use. It had an office component in the base, and anyway, it was on a project on Church Street, in Toronto, which is in like the gay town of Toronto. I don't even know if it's proper for me to say that anymore, but I'll just say that.
The village.
Thank you. And so I remember I got there, and there's people generally don't like height and they don't like new buildings. So I was nervous. I was giving the presentation. I got everything set up. All the chairs were arranged. And then I like to go to the bathroom right before I give the presentation, obviously. So I went up to the person downstairs and I said, can you tell me where the bathroom is? And he asked me, I should say they asked me, what kind of bathroom I wanted, and rhymed off, about 8 different options for me. And I just really wanted to use the bathroom. Like, I don't want to say that I didn't care, but in that moment, and I'm not picky either. So I kind of wonder if we're going from what might have been 8 options 14 years ago to more of an option of, your level of comfort, again, to use that word. Like, how private do you want to be? Do you want to be in your own room? Do you care if it's like a kind of, I remember I had one client that called it like an Ally McBeal bathroom. I think that was like the first TV show that had men and women sharing the bathroom,
Yep.
And it's just about your level of comfort, and just being able to have, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 options to be able to choose that. And how do you communicate what bathroom offers that level of comfort?
Yeah, I think privacy comes into it, which again is, and then there's an added cultural aspect to this as well. I first noticed when I worked in the Middle East that the option for a toilet or a cubicle that's completely separate and sealed away, it doesn't matter if it's male or female, the level of privacy and dignity is something that's actually a factor. So yeah, that could be one way of actually dealing with these suites, is branding them in a different way, as you say, via privacy.
Yeah, and I think in designing sort of welfare facilities as well, I think we've got to be, I guess we've got to be careful that we don't kind of create spaces that people get overwhelmed with, like you, Heather, you said, you've been presented with 8 options, and for someone who just wants to use the toilet, you don't want to offend someone by saying, I want to use that one, but not this one. You want a facility that will make people feel welcome and not sort of, I guess, alienated. If you feel right, I'm nervous to say I want to go to this toilet because I might present myself in a negative way.
Yeah, which is currently, this is the position that we're in at the moment, is that the standard unisex toilet in most buildings is labelled disabled. So just changing that label and maybe putting that facility, or looking at what that facility entails, can be a very quick change that actually, like you are changing the labeling, let's say.
On the topic of labeling and perhaps how we're identifying these spaces, I'm going to ask, how can we use signage and wayfinding to help create inclusive spaces for all?
No, I think that's a really good question. We're working on a project at the moment, and I think in terms of signage and wayfinding, I think we need to move away, from the sort of traditional male-female icons for toilets and WCs. I think, I feel that in time, there should be an international standard for WCs and changing facilities that are gender inclusive. So, for instance, as I mentioned earlier on, there is very specific guidance about, around the kind of iconography for, that represents disabled access. I remember drawing a wheelchair logo for a project, and the accessibility consultant saying, no, you can't use that because there is an international wheelchair logo that every designer will have to use, so that a disabled person won't get confused by your slightly stylized disabled logo. So I think there is some way to go, but I think we definitely do need some kind of a standard for that. And as designers, it might be that it starts from bottom up. You see more and more gender neutral iconography being developed, and then that can then make its way into design guides, into some British standard, and it's sort of internationally applied. So when you look at a sign, that's a toilet, that's a gender inclusive toilet. There's no kind of like confusion, and you don't draw something that might potentially be too offensive. I remember seeing an icon where it was it's a stick man or stick woman with like half dressed and half in like traditional male costume, which I thought was, how offensive is that?
There is a Thai restaurant in London where the toilets, the only clue you've got to which toilet is which, is engraved in the wood, is the position in which you urinate.
No.
I thought you were going to go somewhere to do with Braille and signage there for a minute, but this is taking it to a whole other level.
I suppose you could say bladders are genderless, are they?
Yeah.
I'd like to also ask the group, and maybe this plays into the cultural sort of context of how we think about queer spaces and maybe specific design elements that may be common to the village, for example. But how can we preserve queer heritage in buildings and public spaces?
Yep, it feeds on with the graphics from our last question. Trafalgar Square, ever since Trafalgar Square hosted the end of the Gay Pride March, they changed all the traffic lights to different combinations of gender coming together. And they still have that. So all year long, Trafalgar Square, the traffic lights, so different, depending on where you cross the road, is a whole different gender conversation.
My answer to this question would be, I don't think that's something that we need to worry about at all in society. Personally, I think all these areas are flourishing and spreading and growing and becoming so widely accepted by everyone and encouraged. I mean, I love watching my children grow up in where we are in time and history right now. They are free thinking about everything, and like the more color, the more rainbows, the more like it's all expected, encouraged, and like everyone is just hungry for more. I don't think these spaces are in jeopardy. I think they're just exploding with
There's
action. Yeah.
Yeah, there's two things to that, which is minority groups are almost retreating into app-based technologies, and I'm talking there not just as a gay person of London, but also as an old goth from the 1980s. Like these is sort of a lot of the, let's say, the villages or the specific areas. They developed around a certain club, or especially for Soho, it's 24-hour community and good coffee. So where do you get good coffee at 3 in the morning after a club? So, and that 24-hour economy creates that zone. And the there's the one thing that the need for a gay bar is no longer there. It's now app based. So some of those are quite threatened. But we're getting in London developers pressure on the desirable places to live. Lots of apartments appear, the values of the properties go up, the community can no longer afford to stay there. Parallels for this are in Chinatown as well. But there are sort of moderately successful campaigns to protect the nighttime economy of London, and recognizing that certain skateboarder parks or certain nightclubs are more important than the new millionaire apartments. So the actual noise level at 2 in the morning is protected in planning.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You have to make sure that you don't get rid of the reason for being.
For it being there.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, Manhattan,
Yeah.
Manhattan and central London are both becoming as exciting as Geneva. Sort of the old London life is now in a sort of like a ring and around the city centre. But then, cities they evolve, areas move on. But we really are at risk now that the creative community of London is actually a 50-mile or 70-mile radius. Is the same thing happening in Manchester, Rom?
Um, we've got, we've in Manchester, I'd say it is quite a similar situation happening, but in where we've got Canal Street and a gay village, I think this is probably another question further down, but we talk about the idea of this sort of gayborhood and whether or not the gay village should be contained in one place, or if it should be everywhere. I think it's incredibly difficult question.
Ghettoization is a risk in that,
Yeah,
isn't there?
I know
Yeah.
that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that the whole concept of this of gay village, I think it's probably a hangover from a time when gay people would congregate in specific places in the city where they felt safe. For me personally, there are times I felt unsure, venturing into certain parts of the city where if I didn't tone down the gay, I might get treated differently, and even as an architect, in the construction industry, we're in a very hetero-dominated industry. When visiting, construction sites, often I have to be, super conscious about not being too camp. I've got to turn down the dial,
I no,
um,
no, no, no,
and
no,
kind of
no, no. I invert that. When I go to site, I wear fur, I wear Cuban heels, and I terrify them.
Good. That's awesome.
good.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it, isn't it?
You probably get everything that you want, every single site instruction.
But this is also, I know women do this as well. It's like you use your rarity
Yeah.
to intimidate.
Yeah.
But yes, but you're absolutely right, Rom. There is that threshold that you have to cross. And I think my own experience, I was a strange asexual creature of the 80s. This dialogue that we're having now, just as you said, Heather, it's fascinating for me to see that all of us, the club kids and strange creatures of London, New York, we're seeing now the generation of the kids that have been brought up by us as the parents. And so this sense of definition has, it was about sexuality and equal rights for us in our time, but to move into gender was beyond me. It shocked me. I did a gender specific lighting installation for a festival in Cambridge, and the first time I heard about this multiple gender issue coming up was, yes, sure enough, we had people could respond to the lighting by dialing in on their phone and just registering, yes, I'm a man, I'm a woman. And when I presented this to them, boom, yeah, so how many genders are you representing? And that's the first I'd heard of it, actually. It's like, well, you do have 8 colors there, don't you? So we know that that's happening in education, etc. But I think, just as you said, I think it's fascinating that when you look at this over a 30-year or 40-year period, it's absolutely stunning what's going on now. And yes, I think it is enshrined in local authorities and also planning. One thing I was going to say as well was leasing. I'm not sure if in Manchester, Canal Street is protected by the leases, as in a company has to say it is actually oriented to the community, because I think Soho is a bit more freewheeling, and it's just developers are encouraged to follow the pink pound, as we call it here, because there's actually more money to be made in it. But it's also we can extend that to San Francisco, and again, whether there's actually a local authority preservation placed on Castro.
Well, I find this conversation super interesting because also together with like the kind of, I'll just say gay village again here in Toronto, but part of also together with that crowd is artists, right? And so they sort of travel as one big bunch and finding the kind of new areas of the city, making them cool, making them valuable. Then everyone wants to live there. Then the prices go up, and then then the next generation of artists and very creative, adventurous people move to the next area, and that's the way it goes. And you're right. I think keen developers and just generally entrepreneurs that turn their mind to what the kind of, again, reason for being of those neighborhoods stand to gain a little bit more, because that's why people are going there. It's like the real roots and the grittiness, and that particular club or cafe or concert venue, that's what makes all these beautiful rich layers of our cities. Yeah. And you don't want it to be washed clean. No one wants to live in a city yeah.
So I think that we've got time for just one more question here. And I'd like to ask, going back to thinking about thresholds and how we bring our lived experiences into the spaces that we occupy. And I think we see in some instances many queer folks code switch or hide their identities to feel a sense of safety and security. So how can we create safety and security in our buildings and public spaces? What are those specific design elements that we can take away?
I think it's as Colin. I'm very aware of code switching, and I think I just mentioned it earlier. When on a construction site, I probably behave completely differently to how I would on a Friday night in a bar, for instance. But I think education of the workforce is key. I think we've got to ensure that inhabitants of buildings, public spaces, don't feel alienated. I think we already see this. We're seeing this happening already with many companies investing in initiatives and training for staff. I think for example with BDP, the EDI efforts of BDP belonging, for instance, I think it's had a massive impact on how I feel as a gay man in the company, knowing very well that there's very strong support, and there's the effort to create more awareness. And I think this makes you, I guess, more brave to be yourself and not code switch as much. You speak the way you'd speak to your partner, to your friend, and you don't feel like you're constantly sort of shielding yourself.
Yeah, no, which is, if you're shutting down, then we're losing a part of you. So, and as a creative office, you want people to, spread out as such, and you want the full person at their full steam. And I think having that environment is, it comes down to a very simple thing. I think in public spaces, holding hands, and it's just a thing where, maybe we should be protecting these spaces because they could evolve away, just as they evolved and appeared, because there is that sense of just being a majority. Any minority group, if you can just have a few spaces where you're temporarily the majority, just that crowd, that can engender that comfort. But I think, it is a challenge to design in. Is some would say, filling a space with rainbow flags or etc. Is that really the way to go?
Yeah, I think we've used the words comfort, privacy, softness. I absolutely agree. The last thing that you want is someone, shutting down or holding back. And no one likes to feel that or be around someone where it's apparent that that's happening. So really getting, good and sensitive people in positions of authority to kind of listen and learn and guide us on these issues of male female signage and all of that stuff. I mean, we're going to be learning constantly. This is something that will continue to evolve, and I think we've made a lot of progress, but who knows what's next? I don't want to predict. I'm happy not predicting the future. So,
Certainly none of us thought we'd be where we are here now. I mean, like I say, I'll never forget standing in that Cambridge College, being asked how many genders I'd allowed for. It hit me like a train.
Well, Colin, Heather, Romulus, I think it's safe to say that this is an evolving topic, that we greatly appreciate your time and contribution towards this conversation. Thank you again for sharing your experiences related to this, and I can't wait to share what we've learned here today in studio and with our collaborators. Thank you to you all, and be well.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.